information about our guide and model according to Spiritism. With that, we open our service of tonight by welcoming everyone in both plane, and so be it. So, again, hi Luiz, how are you?
Hi, Daniel. How are you?
Nice to have you here again. So,
Okay.
before I pass the word to our dear friend Luiz Lima, I just wanted to read a little bit about him. And although it's not the first time that you are here, right,
No,
Luis?
it's not. No.
So, but just if I can see here, my cell phone, Luis Lima has begun his journey in Spiritism since 1990 as as a serious research on the scientific aspect of Spiritism. Luis has been facilitating the studies of how to bridge science and Spiritism in both language, Portuguese and English. Mr. Lima is a renowned lecturer in the Spiritist movement and participates in local and national seminar and events all year round. Luis Lima holds a degree in electronic engineering and he works in the computer network industry. Wow. Thank you, Luis. And I'm eager to learn. And as we here in the Spirit Society of Baltimore, welcome and all the flaws is yours, or the network is yours, right? So
Okay.
we come back later for question and answers.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this other opportunity. To opportunities like this, we don't miss them. We don't pass. So we're gonna discuss today the teachings of Jesus. Um, what we are gonna do, rather than speaking about each one of these teachings, because that would take forever. Okay. So we're gonna bring you some slides on the screen so you can follow along. But mostly, we are going to put things into a context because very often we have a hard time understanding at least some of the teachings, not necessarily us spiritists, but in general. He says things that we kind of, this is not very clear to me. It could be this, it could be that. And that's because things are not put in context as they should. So this is what we are going to do today: put things into context. What do we spiritists have to do with Jesus? It all starts from the very beginning of spiritism, when Allan Kardec publishes in 1857 the Spirit's Book, first edition, with 501 questions. And one of these questions, already on the first edition, we do have that question. Allan Kardec starts to understand that there's a moral standard that we have to follow. So he asks the spirits, I'm getting the idea. We have to follow a certain morality, but is there somebody on earth that we can follow? And the answer is pretty straightforward. That's Jesus. So what does Allan Kardec do? This is 1855, 56, 1 or 2 years before he actually publishes the Spirit's Book. So he has to know everything about that one who is going to be the model. He's going to serve the modeling guide. Where is he going to find information about Jesus in 1850 something? There's only one place: the New Testament, or the Bible. So that's what Allan Kardec does. He gets into the Bible, starts reading through the New Testament in details to get all the information that he was being told to study and bring along in the next publications. As he was going along with these studies, he started to have questions. So some of the things were not clear. Some of the things he needed to go, he wanted a little bit more details. So he took these questions to the medium mystic sessions that he was going every week, just like we still have today. And then he would just ask these questions to the spirits. The spirits would respond. That response, or those responses are published at the end of each chapter as instructions from the spirits at the end of each chapter in the Gospel according to Spiritism. So what you see as instructions at the end of each of the chapters are transcripts of the answers the spirits gave him about Jesus, full transcripts. So that's our relation to Jesus. That's how things come about in Spiritism. Now, when Allan Kardec goes to study the Gospels, things start to get a little bit confusing. I'm sure you have heard that the Gospels have been changed, altered, modified, edited, of all sorts, and over and over again. We all know that. That's a fact. That's a known fact. So how are we sure if we are basing our, if we are based, if Allan Kardec is basing everything on these Gospels, how do we know we're not getting fake news, to use a more modern time a word? How do we know? So we want to take a look at this. We're going to go pass along, go back in history and understand what all of that meant, being edited, changed, and so, and what it means for us today. So the four Gospels, by the way, in when the Gospels were written, there were not only four, there were a lot of them. The four Gospels were chosen in the year 376 after Christ, but that's another story. If you look at all the Gospels, you see you have a list of seven things in here for each one of them. We're not going to go through this because it's a lot, but things are they get a little bit confused because the four Gospels not necessarily write the same thing, the same way, in the same order. Think of this. If somebody comes to me, for example, and says, these Gospels were written 30, 40, 50 years after Jesus' death. So think about this. Somebody comes to me and says, can you write something about a person who died 40 or 50 years ago? Let's just say Elvis Presley, very famous person. Can you write something about Elvis Presley? 2 pages, 3 pages. My first question before I even think about it is, who is going to read? Because if I'm writing this for people in their 70s and 80s, that's one thing. If they are in their 40s, that's another thing. If they are young kids, 15, 16, 17, that's another thing. And one does not necessarily contradict the other. So when these Gospels were written, the audience matters. Who is reading? When Mark, or whoever Mark was, when he was writing his Gospel, who is reading it? And that's the important thing. That's the line you see here listed as audience. So for Mark, his audience was Romans, not Jews, Romans living very close to Judea. When you live very close to another country, another, culture, you inherit in part that culture. So some of the things you are aware of, maybe not all of it. So that's what Mark is writing for. Matthew writes for Jews, absolutely Jews living in Judea. So they know everything about Judaism. There's no, what is this, what is that? It's cut clear. Luke is writing for people very far away from Judea, which are modern day Greece, very far away, nothing, no relation whatsoever to Judaism. And John is writing for Gentiles, which are new Christians, also far away from Judea. So the audience will produce a different outcome. That's why the four Gospels are not the same. But it doesn't mean that one is right, the other is wrong. So as you go along and read these Gospels, it might be confusing because one guy might say one thing and the other gospel might say something else, and you say they're not in line, but not necessarily. Like I said about, writing about, for example, Elvis Presley. What I write for 15-year-olds to read doesn't mean that, it's wrong for the 70s. It's just different. So these gospels created a lot of confusion throughout time. How do they start? Everything starts right here when Jesus is walking with, the disciples and people with him. He's just walking. He's just verbal tradition. This is verbal tradition. What is verbal tradition? For example, I go to hear what he's saying somewhere. And then when I got back home, my folks at home asked me, what did he say? So I'm going to pass it along. Well, he said this and that. This is verbal tradition. It's me telling them what I understood, not what he said necessarily. So this verbal tradition gets on and on, passed along. But a few factors will take a place here. First of all, is distance. For example, if you said something, let's just say in Jerusalem, when this thing gets to Rome, which is a very long distance, does it get in there correctly? Because from Jerusalem, it gets passed along to the neighboring city, and then the next neighboring city, then the next one, the next one. So you go through 50 cities, or maybe even more. Does it get correctly to its destination? We don't know, not necessarily. Time plays a role because the information, you hear Jesus saying something, and you don't say anything, you don't verbalize that until, let's just say, 70 years later. Are you going to remember exactly what he said with the words exactly as they were? Probably not. So time plays a role, culture plays a role. You pass information from one culture to the other. There's an a filter in there, a natural filter that each culture has. And also we have the worst of all, which is translation, that we are going to get into a little bit. So verbal tradition has its problems, potentially. So there was a time when we say, listen, we cannot live on verbal tradition only because the first generation apostles, when they die, what's going to happen? We need to write this thing for the future generations. We need to write this. That's how the manuscripts come about. However, how do you write something like this? Think about the very first one of them. Pick one of the Gospels. Think about the original, the very original. Somebody put the words in form of a manuscript. How do you copy that? The original copy machine, the original copy and paste, nothing like this. The way you copy is you put the original in front of you, a blank piece of paper or lambskin or whatever it is, papyrus, and you copy looking at the original and putting the information on the new one. That's what it is. It's a tremendous work. So does it open for the possibility of mistakes? Oh yeah, absolutely. We can make mistakes copying things. We can go from one line and skip the next line and go down two lines. It just happens. Another way to write and copy from the original was to do in groups. So first of all, two types of people can copy this. One is a volunteer. You can get a book and say, oh no, I'll do this for you on good faith. However, you're not a professional of copying. Remember, only 5% of the population can read and write. So those who can, they make money, they get paid for, they are professionals. But you can try to do yourself as a volunteer. If you are as a volunteer, you are much more susceptible to make mistakes than the professional. The professional that does that job is called a scribe. So a scribe will copy that supposedly with no errors. It's not the case. It's never going to be the case. However, it should be a better copy than anybody else. Or you can do this in groups. Instead of having the scribe having the original side by side with a blank piece of papyrus, for example, one person would read out loud to a group of, let's say, 20 scribes. So you would read out loud the first sentence and wait for all the 20 scribes to write that down. That's more efficient because you have more copies at the same time. However, it doesn't guarantee that it's 100% correct. You see, this is the kind of thing they had to copy. Old Greek, there is no punctuation, there is no space between words, there is no paragraph, nothing. It's this. Us today, or I'm going to speak for myself, sorry. Me today, if you give me 200 pages of this to copy, I do not guarantee that I'm going to make it right 100%. I do not. So, possibilities for mistakes, yes, there are. Then the next way to spread the gospels was to read. Remember, somebody reading to somebody, because only 5% of the population can read and write. So you can get the gospel, for example, in the hands of a priest in church. He will get the gospel and read out loud to the community, to the people in the congregation. However, what gospel is he reading from? Is that very close to the original, or does it have side notes from a scribe, like the small picture that you see here? You see here, there's a main text on towards the right, and the scribe made side notes on the left. So you see how complicated this is. It's becoming more challenging than just, oh yeah, the Gospels got copied over time. It's a lot more complicated. And then the worst of all comes in place: translation. Okay, let me try to explain translation without blowing our time here, because this goes far. We can spend a lot of time here. Let's say, for example, hopefully most of you can understand, for example, a few things in Spanish. But let's say, for example, that or Portuguese, that I, I want you to, or somebody asks me to translate a phrase from English to Spanish/Portuguese. And the phrase is, my friend is here. My friend is here. And I translate, and I will say, mi amiga está aqui, or in Portuguese, minha amiga está aqui. The minute that I do this, not only I translate it, but I interpret it for you by telling you that it's a woman, a woman. That's complicated, because when I say my friend is here, I'm not saying a woman or a man. It's just a friend. And the other way around, if you have to translate from Spanish, Portuguese, mi amigo está aquí, and you translate to English, my friend is here, the person listening to you in English is going to say, hey, hold on. My friend is here. Is that a man or a woman? So he lost 50% of, the content. And then there's cases of translations, which is obviously much worse. Now, I want you to consider this, and this is very serious. There is almost 100% of agreement of all historians of all times that the Gospels were originally written in Greek. Almost 100%. So let's take that as a truth for sake of the argument. So the Gospels were written in Greek. What language do you think that Jesus spoke to his people? Did he speak in Greek? No. If he did not speak in Greek, even if I'm the first one writing, here's my pen, here's my paper, I'm writing down what Jesus says. I'm right below his mouth, just writing them. When I write what he said, I translate it. So there is a certain possible level of interference, just like the phrases that I gave as an example. So even the very first original might be slightly different than what is said, because the language is not the same. Worse, to get to us today, both of the languages that we are talking here, Aramaic or Old Hebrew and Old Greek, they are all dead. And in the middle of all of this, scribes will make, or translators/scribes would make alterations. Alterations can be of two types. Unintentional, just like I showed you, the piece of text that they had to copy. We make mistakes, but that's not intentional. It just happened. Slip of the pen, let's say. But these these mistakes could be intentional, because you see, the scribes are those that, they go head to head with Jesus all the time, because Jesus is telling them, you're hypocrites and so and so and so, and they don't like Jesus. And these are the people translating the information. So they might not like Jesus, so they might make intentional changes because of theology. They don't like what Jesus says, they would like something else. So they adapt the words of Jesus or the gospel they have to translate from to their own personal interests or personal belief. And there's also something called harmonization, which is more or less like this. Let's say you have two gospels. You want to be sure you have the best copy. So you pick up two gospels, which not necessarily are the same, not at all. So you look at the first, there's a phrase. You look at the second, there's a phrase slightly different. And you say, well, let me make a composite of this. Let me harmonize the translations. So what you do is you just created a third. And this goes on and on and on. And translations and alterations are all over the place. And Allan Kardec is reading the Gospels because he was told to, because that's the person who's going to serve as model and guide. So he needs to know everything about this person. Here's an interesting map. It's dated about the year 200 after Jesus. You have colors on this map. So, for example, the areas in shades of green, in these areas, the Gospel of Mark is predominant. John is predominant in the blue areas, Luke in the red areas, and Matthew in the dark brown areas. So let's say, for example, a guy in Judea, a Jew, a real Jew, reading and studying the Gospel of Matthew, he travels to Rome. He goes there, he goes to the congregation because he's Christian, he's learning about it. So he goes to Rome and goes to the congregation, starts talking to people in the congregation, say, oh, this passage in the gospel is nice, I love it. And the people in Rome say, are you crazy? There is no such a passage in there. How come? Because we are reading different things. And not only that, for every person reading the gospel, it puts its own or his or her own interpretation on top of it. So this can really be complicated, and the empire is huge. So you're not going to have never a harmonized teaching based on the Gospels. It's impossible. So going back to the beginning, started with verbal tradition. How? Because Jesus had two ways of passing along the information. Actions, what he was doing, what he said. He was not demanding, you guys do this and I'm going to be watching. No, he was the one doing it. And he had the speeches. So he was teaching people using these two methods. Then this becomes, again, verbal tradition. We decide to write these things. Those are the manuscripts. They go through translations and interpretations. And here we are today. Two things we need to pay attention here. When we start writing this, the emotions disappear. For example, if you're looking at a blackboard, and on this blackboard, I write 3 words, I love you. That's it. And you look at it, okay, I love you. You have no idea what the context is. There's no emotion attached. To make this clear in terms of what it means exactly, you have to have prior description. And that's where a professional writer makes a difference. He will have 2 or 3 chapters, telling a story, and this is beautiful, and the guy did this and the girl did that, and it was such a nice thing, and so and so and so. And then he gets to the I love you, and then it makes sense to you because you know the history behind it. So, but that's a professional writer in our modern day. The Gospels don't have any of that. So you don't know when Jesus says things that are written, what kind of emotion he was carrying and the people listening were carrying. Was he really effective? Was he really harsh on people? Were the people like, oh my God, what do I do? We don't know. So that's one thing that we miss in the written form of passing information along. On the other hand, these two things here, the way he acted and spoke, that brings the authority. And his authority, which we're going to speak about, is so great, is such an authority that it supersedes the lack of emotions in the Gospels. What is this authority exactly means? Well, in those days, we had the Roman Empire presiding over, per se, Judea. So you had two belief systems, Judaism and paganism. Judaism is based on belief. It comes from Abraham, right? It's based on belief. Paganism is not based on belief, it's based on practice. You have to do this sacrifice. And they wanted to force the Jews to do sacrifices. And the Jews would say, why should I have to do this? And the Roman soldiers would say, because you have to practice that. And the Jews would say, I don't believe it. And the Romans, I don't care. You see, that's a tremendous difference. The Jews revolt because they had to do something they didn't believe at all. In Judaism, uh, 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 the belief is exclusivist. There is only one God, and that's the one I'm going to follow. In paganism, you have a million gods: God of the city, and the stone, and the sea, and the moon. So the authority in Judaism comes from this exclusivist belief, which in turn means knowledge. I have the knowledge, becomes from this one source. Those who have the knowledge can establish the authority because they will pass along those knowledges that will be written as scripture, and that becomes your sacred text. This is Judaism. Jesus lives and comes from within Judaism. So all that applies. So why does he have such an authority? Because he had the knowledge. He demonstrated that with quoting the Old Testament to the Jews, and making them understand that the belief that was brought before him had to be followed. With that, he established an authority, and that's why it was necessary to write text down to become scripture, and then sacred text. That's how the authority comes around. Now, in Spiritism, we go a lot further than this. In this book here, On the Way to the Light, there's a little passage called Jesus, the Divine Sculpture. Yeah, let me show you this again. Jesus, the Divine Sculpture, where the spirits in that brought the information to us will define from the spiritist point of view, who is this Jesus, right? They're going to tell us about the authority of Jesus at a much higher level than the authority the Jews perceived. So this spirit, Jesus, shaped the geological sculpture of the orb. Isn't that something? He established the rules for all the physical phenomena on Earth. He organized the scenario of life and made the atmospheric pressure suitable for human beings. All him. You and I, we can't do this. Don't even try. That was him. He established the great centers of energy in the ionosphere and the stratosphere and constructed the ozone factories, ozone that we need so much to breathe. And so he put these ozone factories at 25 and 35 miles high to filter the sun rays. So they would get to the surface in a way that was appropriated for humans to live on. He set out all the lines of progress for future humankind and endangered the harmony of all the physical forces that preside over the cycle of planetary activities. That's Jesus. Is that authority or what? Right? So he comes with this impressive amount of authority to the point that whatever he said had to be written down. He became scripture right on the spot. So, with this, we can now start to understand things a little better. So, we already know who Jesus was. And from Spiritism, we know there are two worlds, the material world and the spiritual world. The material world has matter as we know it, but it has matter also in other forms that we cannot perceive with our five senses. The spiritual world has spirits, intelligent principles. Now, let's go back to the time of Jesus. He is incarnated on earth in Judea. So it's a physical thing. There's a physical body of a man, for all purposes, walking down the streets of Judea and so talking to people around him. And he would say things like, "My kingdom is not of this world." Okay, so with the knowledge that you and I have today, he is incarnated in Judea, material physical body. And he says, "My kingdom is not of this world." So what is the world he's talking about? It's the other one. So he's talking about the spiritual world. He's not talking about the physicalities of a material life. No, he's talking about something much different, spirit world. So we look at all these gospels. We have all this conflicting information, which we are going to deal with in a few minutes. We have all these things. We have all this distribution that we showed of who is reading which gospel where, which aggravates things a little bit. And then we have Jesus. The gospels, I try to make it clear in the beginning, the gospels are written with an audience in mind. So Matthew writes for the Jews in Judea. John writes for the Gentiles, and so and so and so. So each of the evangelists, each of the gospel have a predefined, known audience. But really, we are not interested in Mark's audience or John's audience or Luke's audience. No. We are interested in Jesus' audience. Who is he talking to? Because that's the thing. Who is he talking to? Because he was saying things that were hard to understand. Some of them are here, not all, but some of them are here. Love your enemies, love your neighbor, love your enemies. Come on, right? 2,000 years ago, what is this guy saying? Why do we not understand this? Because we do not pay attention who is Jesus' audience. He is not talking. He's not talking to Peter. He's talking to an immortal spirit that in that life, in that incarnation, had a name, Peter, and had an occupation. The guy was a fisherman. He was not talking to Matthew. He was talking to an immortal spirit that in that life, in that incarnation, had a name, Matthew, and he had an occupation. He was a tax collector, and on and on and on. So he was talking to immortal spirits. That means if I try to understand these, I put six of them. If I try to understand these six things as a physical person, it's going to be trouble. So, two things we need to understand from this. First, if I try to understand, for example, let's pick one, love your enemies. Okay? So, if I try to understand what Jesus is saying, love your enemies, at the physical level, what do I have to do? I have to think for a little bit. Let me think for a couple of minutes. Who is my worst enemy? Oh, I found it. This guy here. Now, I need to find out where he lives. So I need to go to his house, knock on his door. When he opens up, I'm going to be wide open arms. Hey, guy, I love you. That's what love your enemies is at the physical level. And so is love your neighbor. And things like abandon father and mother. What is this at the physical level? Get your stuff, pack and go and never see them again, never talk to them again. Is this what Jesus is saying? If you try to understand this from his point of view as an immortal spirit, things change completely. Completely. So some of his teachings are difficult to understand because we make them difficult. We try to adapt the teachings to what is comfortable for us, which is, the material physical life. And there's a tremendous clash of ideas. Things don't work well when I do this. Can you imagine Jesus recommending you to abandon father and mother and, children and brothers and sisters, pack and go, and never leave, never call, never talk to them again? Don't receive any email from them, shut down. Cancel culture. Is this really what he's saying? No. He's talking to an immoral spirit. So he's talking to a spirit that has in that life what we call a father and a mother. And they're all going together. So, for example, let's say you are on a path for a greater spiritual life. So you go to a spiritist center, you read, you try to understand, and so and so, and you try to convince your father or your mother to go with you to the spirit center to be, work on their moralities and so, work on their, questions and they, okay, I'm just gonna go as company. So at one point, it becomes clear that it's not for them. Their time has not yet come. You have to respect that. That's when you abandon father and mother. Meaning, because this is for immortal spirits. You are going to continue on your journey and let them continue on theirs. You and I, there was a time that we were not yet ready for this that we're doing today. Spiritism, understanding the immortal spirits, the intelligent principle. There was a time that this wasn't for us too. So it happens to members of our family, to our relatives, to our father, to our mother, to our sisters and brothers. Their time will come. Meanwhile, you cannot stop because you're going to force them down their throat to become spiritist. And you go to the spiritist center and you buy 10 copies of the spiritist codification, you give to each family member. It's not their time. First of all, it has to be respected. And this is what abandoned father and mother is. It's not pack and go. You see, it makes a tremendous difference. It makes a tremendous difference. Love your enemies. Love your neighbor. There's a full-blown explanation provided to us by Spiritism of why I should love my enemy. And the explanation is very simple. He is not my enemy. He's the one trying to, used by God or the highly evolved spirits to help me evaluate, to help me go through my inventory of problems that I have to work on to be better. That's all they are. They're not enemies in terms of, oh, let's go for a duel outside. You get your gun, I get my gun. Let's see who shoots who first. That's not it. It is that if you try to understand at the physical level, on a physical life only. But that wasn't the audience. So this is the first thing that we get out of this. Second thing that we get out of this. Even if you and I, even if we were not there with him, incarnated in those days, in Judea, even if we never heard him physically speak to my ear, it doesn't matter, because he spoke to me too, because I am an immortal spirit, just like Peter was, just like Matthew was. So I can say, well, but I wasn't there, so it doesn't matter. 2,000 years, I wasn't there. I wasn't even born. You're trying to understand this as a physical person living a physical, material only life. So you are not, if you do this, when you position yourself like this, you just became not part of Jesus' audience. You just left the theater. You're no longer part of the audience when you do this. And that goes for all of us. Look at this very interesting phrase in our Gospel according to Spiritism. If you take your Gospel according to Spiritism, any translation, any year, any language, the first phrase at the introduction is, I'm going to display the phrase for a better visual appealing, but it's one straight phrase. The subject matter contained in the Gospels may be divided into 5 parts. 1, the ordinary events in the life of Christ. What is this? It's narrative. Jesus went down the mountain, Jesus went up the mountain, Jesus went there, Jesus went to the sea, Jesus left, the boat. That's it. Ordinary events. Just like you and I, we have our ordinary events. We do errands, we work. That's it. So 5 parts. Second part, the miracles. Third, the prophecies. Fourth, the words used by the church to establish the dogmas. And fifth, the moral teachings. This is all in one phrase. I just put 5 bullets to make it a little bit more appealing, visual. So the phrase continues. Although the first 4, what are the first 4? Anything except the moral teachings. Although the first 4 have been the object of controversy, and that's what we spent 30 minutes on, the last moral teachings has remained unassailable. There is 100% agreement among all historians that the moral teachings of Jesus were not, and there's a million different ways to cross-check this. That's why they say it. The moral teachings of Jesus were not altered, because there are not only 4 gospels. There are other gospels, other writings at the time from people who had nothing to do with Christianity, just writers. When you cross all the information, it becomes clear that none of the moral teachings were altered. That becomes more comforting. You go like, ah, wow, that gives us the confidence that what we have in this book, Gospel according to Spiritism, and anything that derives information from it, is pretty solid. A lot of confidence it gives us. So ultimately, his teachings target unconditional love towards God and towards the neighbor. Basically, that's all it is. There are two pillars that will sustain unconditional love towards God. One of them is faith, and the other is prayer. Those are things that enforce our unconditional love towards God. And those are things that we practice as we go along. And also, there are two pillars to sustain our unconditional love towards the neighbor that we are still learning. The first is charity, the practice of charitable acts. And the second is justice. And then, no wonder why the most important moral law is love, charity, and justice. Because this is what he came for, to teach us a lot of things so we can get to understand what unconditional love is. And anything else that he taught was trying to enforce this. And that became our moral of reference. What Jesus brought to us is our moral of reference. What we should do, what we should not, what we can do, what we cannot, and so and so and so. This work, this is what Allan Kardec had to do when he got the answer that Jesus was the model and guide. He had to seek the moral of reference. And the moral of reference is in our book, The Gospel According to Spiritism. So the teachings of Jesus are the moral of reference that we needed. I can believe it or not. Now, one thing is important. Look at them. That's for all of us, myself included. We got to look at them as immortal spirits, not as people living a material life. Well, that's what I wanted to bring to you tonight. So if we have any comments, suggestions, and questions, I'll be here. We'll gladly take care of it.
Thank you, Luis.
Well,
That was like, I think we need some time to process all this information, right? For people here. And first of all, thank you so much for bringing this study. Is very, I would say, healthy. Yeah, can you put the light, please? Thank you. It's very healthy to hear about, you know, the teachings of Jesus from a different aspect that is not the only religion aspect, right? And all the work that has been done in terms of translation of the context of that time, right? So I do have a question, but first I wanted to open here. Any question and comment? Oh, online, do you have any? Let me just see here so I can see here in my end. If we have any comment or question. Not, I don't see any comment or question, but um, we know that there are many books that was written in that time about Jesus
Mhm.
that were that was not added in the gospel, in the Bible, right? In the New Testament. So only 4 books was chosen, and you showed here. So my question for you is like, what about the other 60, 70 books that we know that people call apocryphal books that were not
Mhm.
added? And do you know anything about the criteria that the church used to put those books uh, in the Bible? Any
Yes,
suggestion?
it all starts in the year 326. But on the year 325, we had the first Council of Nicaea, in which one of the things was it was brought up during the council. It was not something that was, we are going to discuss. No, it did happen during the council, year 325. And somebody suggested, there are too many things out there. Some of these things that were written are fake news, to use a modern word. So some of these things are fake news. How can we be sure that we are going to pass along those gospels who are more trustworthy? So that starts in 325. So the bishops will discuss here and there. At times it comes back, and so. And one guy, kind of throughout this year, as of that point, which is the Bishop of Alexandria, Athanasius of Alexandria, he becomes this guy, kind of coordinating all of this idea or the topic. And then in the year 376, in another council, he said, I finally got the 4 books who will define the gospel. So he got a lot of questions. First question is, why those? And he said, because the others don't have the information that we can cross and kind of make sure that they were good. A lot of the things that were said are very confusing, and it's not clear cut to me. And then he said, he was asked another question. There are more than 4 that will make good candidates. We understand what you're saying. There are 200 of them, but why not 5 or 6? There are more that will, make it. And his answer is the joke of the century. His answer is because the world has 4 corners, so we cannot have more than 4 gospels. And that's how the church established that it was going to be only 4. And then as of the year 376, they were these 4. However, in 1945, in one of the caves in Egypt, a cave area called Nag Hammadi, they found a lot of manuscripts. One of them was the Gospel of Thomas. And the Gospel of Thomas is totally in line with everything that had been said. And the beauty of the Gospel of Thomas, which now we know we should have been included, uh, the beauty is it's a collection of 114 sayings, but there's no narrative. All the 114 sayings start like this: Jesus said, colon, and then the phrase. Number 2, Jesus said, colon, and then what he said. And 114. So these are uh, 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 like kind of straight from the horse's mouth kind of information. It's like Thomas did what I mentioned in the beginning. You have your pen and your pencil, you're under Jesus' mouth writing down. That's the closest that we have. And it adds information to the 4 gospels that became canonical, the canonical gospels. So, but that's how it was defined. Okay.
Thank you. Great. Let's go to see question. I think I saw a question here from Wendell. Yes, Wendell. Let me read here Wendell's question. Very enlightened lecture. Can you say that many principles of some doctrines are a result of the intentional misinterpretation or alterations of the gospel?
Yes, absolutely. There are, let me tell you this, there are 41,000, I'm going to say that again, 41,000 denominations of Christianity. How come? Because of interpretations
Mhm.
and alterations and all of that. Believe it or not, if you those who are interested in criticism, textual criticism, what we know today is that the Bible translation that has it's the farthest possible from the original is King James. It has a lot of inserts. It has a lot of additions. It had a lot of editions. It's far, far, far away from anything else. And you see, it's a well respected in the Christianity. Uh, in Christianity, it's very respected, but it's the worst translation ever in terms of being close to the original, and that's a well-known factor. So other religions will have unintentional misinterpretations, yes, because, for example, let's take. I'm not saying this is the case, but I was just talking about love your enemies, which is hard for us to understand. So the scribe, let's say I'm a scribe. Just let's go back 2,000 years ago. Luiz Lima is a scribe. Luiz Lima is copying the text. And Luiz Lima says, love your enemies. And Luiz Lima scratches his head and says, what? No, 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 no. He made a mistake here. So I'm going to change the text intentionally because I think it's absurd. I don't think it's right. I think the original, the copy that I'm copying from, the scribe made a mistake. So the copy that I have that I'm supposed to copy has a mistake because the guy wrote down here, love your enemies. And that's absurd. See, that would be intentional, an intentional alteration of the Bible. And it is full of those. And other alterations include, not only by scribes, but later in the Middle Ages, the worst translations that we have in the whole, all these 2,000 years are from the year 1250 through 1320. That's when most of these intentional alterations took place. King James is from 1611. So anything after 1300 becomes a problem because you don't know what you're reading anymore, what you're copying from. Okay.
Yes, no, perfect. The next question comes from Albus Morales. Thank you for such an enlightening presentation, Luis. Is it true that the language that Jesus spoke didn't have a written form, and that's why the gospel were written in Greek? Any comment on that?
I can comment. Yeah, Aramaic is still Hebrew. And there was a written form because we have things written in Hebrew in those days prior to Jesus and throughout the time of Jesus and after that. So it was what we believe, historians believe, is that these gospels were not written right away as things happened. The earliest gospel was written in the year 60. However, and that's interesting. If you read the book, Paul and Stephen, if you read the book, Paul and Stephen, carefully, you're gonna see that in the year 33, there was a form. It might not have been fully equal to what we have today of the Gospel of Matthew, but there was at least a kind of a first edition because that's what Paul had with him. And he was taken physically with him to study. That's how he studied. And that was in the year 33. So the Gospels, and that wouldn't be in Greek. So you see, there were written things. The Gospel of Matthew, there's a segment of historians that believe that the Gospel of Matthew, at least this one, was written originally in Aramaic. But the church fathers and everybody that came later, they were Gentiles originally. They were not Jews, none of them. So they didn't like the idea of having something that was not in their native language. So that's why Greek became this, well, this language of reference. And language of reference changes. If you go back 100 years ago, French was the diplomatic language. Today it's not, it's English. Things change. So, however, in the year 33, there was a form of the Gospel of Matthew, maybe a first edition, but there was.
Yes, no, thank you. Kirsten is asking about great talk, Luis. Could you elaborate on how one can practice justice for our neighbors?
Yeah, justice is a huge subject, but
Another talk.
yeah, I think we had a talk maybe a couple of years ago on
Yeah.
justice.
Divine justice, yeah.
Yeah, divine justice. Yeah, you see, there's two different things: divine justice, which resides in the spiritual world, and human justice, which resides in the material world. And because they are different, the outcome is never the same. Justice for our neighbor means, if you look at this as a physical thing, so your neighbor is a physical body, physical person, just like you are, that's one thing. If you look at your neighbor as an intelligent principle, just like you are, that's another thing. Because all the intelligent principles were given the same opportunity in the beginning, simple and ignorant. Each of these intelligent principles, got into their own path, doing their own things and learning with their own experiences, but they were all given the same opportunity. So justice for our neighbor as a person means I might have to take things away from me to be just with him. And that's not a common sense in a materialistic society like ours. How come I'm going to have less to give him more? How come I'm going to say that I'm wrong and he is right? You know, because we try to live justice as physical people, living a material life. And that doesn't apply. The outcome is different. Emmanuel hits the target when he says this: human justice is based on manifested cruelty, meaning you killed somebody, okay? You kill somebody. Human justice looks at the killing, nothing else. Doesn't matter what happened 2 lives ago, 3 lives ago. So human justice looks at manifested cruelty. Divine justice looks at the outcome of the event. Look at the difference. So I think we spoke about this before. If you're going to look at the death of Jesus on the cross, okay, or any death, was it just? If you look at this as a physical life and so and so and so, you're looking at the manifested cruelty, which is a bunch of Roman soldiers coming down hard on this guy and put him on the cross and so on and so on. So was it just? No, he was such a good guy. He wasn't. However, when you look at this from the divine justice point of view, in which things are just or not, depending on the outcome. If Jesus had died from an old age, we wouldn't be here now today. Christianity was born because he had to go through this. So the outcome is what makes it just or not. So when you look at this from divine point of view, was it just? Yes, it was. Even if you don't like it, but it was. So that's the difference. That's we deal with justice as something physical, material, which is good for a lifetime. So the lifetime expires. So I need to get my revenge. I need to get my whatever it is, and that puts us in a difficult situation to understand things.
Yes, no, great. And the fact that he died and he came back, we're not going to go to the
Yeah,
the subject of resurrection, because we in spiritism we don't believe in resurrection, right?
Mhm.
But this is a talk for other, other talk. The fact that he came back, we affirm the immortality of the soul, right?
Yeah.
So then gives a huge fundament, gives to us a assurance that, you know just the physical body that dies, that the
Mhm.
spirit continues living. One thing that we don't have, do we still have questions and comments? So one thing that you mentioned at the end of your presentation, and I wanted to bring, just to make a comment that was great, is that when you put the pillars, right? I really like that, like the pillars that um, pretty much is justifying the unconditional love.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we often forget is that the self-love. We need to love ourselves because Jesus said, love your neighbor as you love yourself, and God as well, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes we forget that we need to have self-love. We need to develop the love to ourselves,
Mhm.
because we give what we have. If we don't have love for ourselves, how can I'm gonna be able to love others, right? So that's one thing that in his teaching Jesus summarized the Ten Commandments, that love God above all everything and love your neighbor as yourself. So I think that's one of the pillars as well that we should not forget, because
Yeah.
many of the problems that we have is because we forget about that we are creature of God and we should love ourselves as well, right?
Yeah.
What do you say about
We cannot deliver what we cannot create.
exactly, exactly? So, any other comment here, question? If not, so can you just give a final remark about this talk? What um, and personally, I have to listen again a couple of times and look at your drawings, your graphic, because I really like the way you deliver the information. The visual that you created help us to understand. So any remark for us here and for those that are listening to us about what you have been learning about this subject, the teaching of Jesus? It seems something that, oh, I know everything about Jesus. I have learned this in school or in the church or in the spirit center. But every time like someone talk about Jesus, they bring a different angle of his life and how we nowadays we see this spirit, right? This
Mhm.
pure spirit that has been our guide and model.
Yeah, I think the basis of everything, maybe the core of what we spoke, is to understand clearly what is Jesus' audience. And we hear a lot of people outside spiritism. As you go along, you meet people in your life, if you have your experiences, and some people would say, no, that doesn't apply. That's not good because I wasn't even there, so he wasn't talking to me, so I don't need to follow that. You see, that creates a very unhappy life, because you're always going to come across this. He was saying that next year or 3 months later, he was saying that, but I wasn't there and I wasn't there. So it's going to be your, for us, spiritists, that is a stepping stone. That's how we learn, by understanding that he was talking to me, yes. Did I have to be there physically? No, I didn't. And it was for me too. And it was for me then, it was for me 2 years ago, it is for me now, it will be for me forever. So, understanding the audience, who is Jesus talking to, I think it makes all the difference. There is a chapter on the gospel according to Spiritism named Strange Morals. And that's about this. That's how things that some sort of morality that he was trying to teach. And we go like, oh, come on, hey, this is strange, because we're trying to look at this as physical people on a physical material life. So I think the core of being in line with his teachings is, we are moral spirits. He was talking to me.
Luis, thank you so much. We are approaching the end of our presentation today. So I will at this moment, what we're gonna do, we're gonna um, do our final prayer, and invite you if you'd like to, volunteer for the final prayer. If not, I can do it here myself. But for those that are watching us, after the prayer, we're gonna end the live stream so we can have our passes here at the center.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. So let's think about our lives, things that we do, things that we like, things that we don't like. Let's revisit quickly the things that we don't like and try to match them up to the teachings of Jesus. Why am I not understanding? He was great. We wanted to thank him for bringing those things, for giving us the opportunity to be in line with his teachings, which have a known destination, which is perfection. Thank you, Jesus, for bringing all of this to us. Uh, that your teachings can reach those revolt, rebel, that will, most of them in prisons, that don't even understand why they're in prison. They can be comforted. They can find their path, find their way, find their light. Same for those in hospital beds. A lot of them also not very happy about their situations. Uh, that these people can see the light, that they can feel your love, that the good fluids from the high spirits can reach these people, also us here on earth, all of us, so we can have a better understanding of what you said, so we can be better people, happier people. Thank you, Jesus. So be it.